Looking through your blind.
Like, Hello, and welcome. I am back. I have not been kicked off the show. I was in New York.
Sent on a sojourn.
Hello, and welcome to the Week Unspun, a weekly live look at the world through the eyes of PR professionals. That will be us. My name is Farzana Baduel. I'm sitting here in London.
I'm David Gallagher, just a few miles up the road, also in London.
And I'm Doug Downs, somewhere nestled in Canada's Rocky Mountains amongst all the ostriches, but we'll get to that in a second.
Now, we have been wading through stories and stories and stories, and we start off the week on Monday saying, right, we know this story, and then every single day there's just a tsunami of news. And what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking a little bit about New York and the United Nations General Assembly, as I was their sort of live correspondent. It was my first time, so I'm a total newbie, so seeing it through the eyes of a total Unga virgin. And we're also going to be talking about, Doug, I know he's really keen to talk about something about ostriches or something.
Yes.
Like that. Maybe it's a Canadian thing, I don't
Very
know.
Canadian. It's not beavers this time, it's ostriches.
Yeah, he's going to talk about that. And then
Mhm.
I've been thinking a little bit about the Labour Party conference here in the UK and Sir Keir's image challenges. And I know Dave is going to weigh in on some news from the US and possibly the world of AI. So guys, where do we start? Can I start off with my...
I want to hear about New York.
Yeah.
You win.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was my first time ever. So of course I've been to New York many times. I love the city. I love New Yorkers. And it was my first time going to the United Nations General Assembly. And I was there wearing a number of hats in terms of the charity boards that I sit on and some work. And, you know, to be honest, as a newbie, it was really overwhelming because you have your, your sort of United Nations sort of, their own sort of events. And then you've got all these different fringe events. So you've got this sort of pay-to-play organization called Concordia that has most amazing events that they put on. So they had, the Syrian president there, for instance, and Goldie Hawn and others. And then you've got the Gates Foundation and they've got their sort of their track. And then you've got, the Clinton Foundation, they've got their track of events. And then you've got all these fringe events you've got to wade through. And so it is quite difficult to navigate as a newbie. And I wrote, and my colleague David wrote a blog about it. So if you Google, how to navigate Unga, we've kind of made it easy for everyone if they want to have a go. Was it useful to be there? Absolutely, because you have a lot of the people from the world of, NGOs, media, politicians, diplomats, business as well. So it is a big networking fest. And, obviously where there's networking, there should be PRs, along the lines of sort of COP and Davos, these great big global events that just draw everyone together and also bring in that sort of serendipity. So not quite knowing who you're going to bump into and what that conversation is going to lead to for you or for your clients or whoever you represent. So it was fantastic. Of course, I got stuck all the time whenever you had President Trump's sort of, driving up and down sort of midtown, and so you'd be stuck and you would be sort of for about 30 minutes, and it wasn't just myself, President Macron and lots of others, President Erdogan couldn't cross the road either, so it was extraordinary, great energy as well. It felt very consequential. The UN, of course, lots of conversations about the future of the UN, the funding challenges, perhaps the also the global south not quite having that voice that they feel that they deserve. And what I was most impressed was actually Unstoppable Africa. They had taken over the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan, and they ran their own sort of 2-day conference. And I thought what was incredible about Unstoppable Africa, they didn't wait to be invited to any other stage. They built their own stage, and it was their 3rd time running. And I thought that was fantastic. And some countries were more visible than others, but really a PR stage for country branding, for soft power, and all the organizations that are transnational. So absolutely fascinating. Would I want to go back next year? Absolutely. Loved it. Now, the first story is about Keir Starmer. So I was following the news, and Keir Starmer had a very important Labour Party conference. And I used to work in the Conservative Party, and conference was this big sort of show. And it was really so important because it was a show to rally the troops. It was a show to say, here's the big vision for the party. And it was about alignment and energizing as well. And of course, all eyes of the sort of national media are on you as well. So it was really interesting to watch Keir Starmer sort of navigate that. And I want to bring in Doug and David in a moment about what their thoughts were. But sort of top line is that, Sky ran a poll during Labour conference asking the members, how popular is Keir Starmer in your eyes? And he didn't fare too well, unfortunately. And of course, a lot of the sort of media leaped upon that story, but it's one thing not being popular in the country, it's quite another thing not being popular within your own party. And of course, the diehard Labour supporters who actually spend the money and take time off work to attend the conference, they're meant to be really your arch supporters. And if they're not happy, something's quite wrong. So what did Sir Keir do? He went on the offensive. No more nice guy, called Farage sort of racist, and that led to all sorts of sort of fallouts. But it did feel a little bit more coordinated in terms of the response, not being on a back foot anymore. And of course, it was always Labour and Conservative in the UK. All of a sudden, Conservative is not even in the conversation, and it's all about Labour and reform. But I wanted to bring you in, Doug. I mean, did the news of the Labour Party conference cut through to North America, or was it just a blip that you saw on your social media?
A little bit in Canada, not in the US. No, it won't translate through. But it sounds like an old tale where a Labour leader is struggling with a Conservative leader who is being received as having more style, right? So Sir Keir Starmer, want to get this right, has to show that he has that style and that he has that charisma. From where I sit, was he not elected in part because he wasn't Donald Trump? He was the calm, reasonable voice of reason. Was that not a big part of the reason he was elected? And now within, I think, a year of his mandate, suddenly Brits are demanding more style and more charisma.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we had quite sort of the chaotic episode during the Conservative Party with our sort of, revolving doors of prime ministers. And yes, we wanted somebody boring. And, he came across as a bit of a John Major, sort of 2.0. But as I think, David, I want to bring you in because David made this fantastic comment about the difference between a campaigner and someone who's good in government. And they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, it's hard to run something, and it's a lot easier to run against something than it is to run something. And right now, the UK's got a lot of challenges. So sometimes that requires a pretty sober look at policy. It requires kind of careful consideration of what the options are, and that doesn't really lend itself to sound bites. I was thinking about the two dominant playbooks in politics right now, and more from a comms perspective than a right versus left perspective. So on the Trump Farage side, you really had the attention and rage playbook, and it kind of exempts you from all previous norms and standards. You can kind of ignore the truth. You can say things, the hotter, the meaner, the more outlandish, the better. And it kind of keeps you constantly in the news cycle, either by virtue of the policies that you're proposing, or in Trump's case, enacting, or just by words. The other playbook is the more fact and reason playbook. And that appeals to, I think, everybody at some level, but it's not always that effective in a social media environment. So if you're asking what I thought about Keir's pushback, I don't know, and I think he did get a little bit of blowback from using the racist language, but it is good to see him from a comms perspective more on the offensive and trying to shape the narrative rather than just respond to it.
Can we tug on that the proclaiming your opponent as a racist? We saw this in the U.S. election campaign where Donald Trump was called a Nazi repeatedly, and it failed miserably. And rage from the perspective of conservative voters, of which there's many, that equates to common sense. And that's the issue that's unfolding.
It's interesting.
I guess I don't know. I don't know if calling Trump a Nazi hurt Democrats. I honestly don't know. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I honestly don't know that anybody who was leaning Democrat heard that and said,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's a bit too far. I'm gonna lean Trump." I never heard that happening. It may be somebody who was leaning Trump felt like he was getting ostracized or overly criticized. Maybe that kind of pushed them into that.
Right.
But
Right.
I think, unlike the U.S. and the U.K., there's still a fairly large section of marginal voters, of swing voters. And I think that that's always very surprising to kind of American U.S. Commentators, where really there's like 2 or 3% of the people that you can possibly move.
Agreed.
And then maybe you're right. Maybe language is a little more nuanced then. But anyway, that's my 2P.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Farzana, I did want to ask a little bit more about the UN General Assembly. And while you were there, Doug and I were texting. We did joke when the escalator stopped whether you did that by accident and then the teleprompter. But again, taking politics out of it, what's your take from a comms perspective? I mean, I get it from, national branding, kind of big international movements. That's a place to be. Is it a good environment for corporates? Is it possible to use that stage to push through an industry or corporate message, or is it too noisy, too crowded, and no chance of actually cutting through the clutter?
I think it depends on the corporate, depends on their messaging, because it is very much the intersection of, sort of the sustainability credentials. You also had Climate Week taking place at the same time. So if the corporate is leaning into its sort of CSR, its sustainability, then it would make sense to have a presence there, because it is very much the intersection of, of the not-for-profit sector, the development sector, and government and policy. So it would very much depend on the corporate. But I do think that actually it is really good to show up, because just the eyeballs that you have in even hosting a fringe event, and you had these incredible organizations that were very targeted, so they would put themselves on the sort of the fringe list. And even if it was a low cost operation like a breakfast, they would be able to invite people to invite themselves by invitation and then check their profile to see if they are the right stakeholder. So you did see a lot of these events and breakfasts in particular that were hosted. And it was quite extraordinary. You saw a lot of people having breakfasts at 7 a.m. and then another one at 8 a.m. and those sort of power breakfasts, because I went to some of these places and I actually couldn't squeeze people in. So I did a 7 o'clock and like an 8:15 breakfast at this kind of swanky place in New York for breakfast. And you see all this people doing the same thing, because they're only in New York for those few days, and they just have to stack everyone up in order to sort of get those meetings in. But yeah, I definitely think that it's useful not only to attend as a delegate, but also to look to see how you can have a presence. And it doesn't have to be hiring the entire Marriott, for 2 days and do a full-on conference. It could be something really small, like a breakfast, an afternoon tea, etc. And also, don't forget the power of serendipity. If you stay in the right hotel where some other delegates are staying, and you just go in the lift, and there you have it. I don't know, the senior advisor to the president of XYZ. You just don't know what doors those will open, and people are quite open and friendly to conversations. I mean, I had these incredible conversations with people from all over the world, just waiting for Trump's sort of cavalcade to go through, because you're waiting around for half an hour, trying to cross the road, and the police are like blocking you. So you end up just chatting to people and say, "Oh, where are you from? What do you do?" And you exchange business cards. So and it's very New York. It was a fantastic time.
I do like what Unstoppable Africa is doing, owning its own space, creating its own channel. I'm really getting turned on to that as a PR and marketing pro.
Yeah.
Well, you changed my mind too. Or maybe I wasn't totally made up, Farzana, but looking at this from an agency perspective, I've never been to the UN General Assembly, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but you've talked me into thinking about it. I did, in various capacities, go to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and it got to a point where I was worried that agencies that were trying to be seen there, have introduced some sort of thought leadership there, were really just sort of shouting into the wind, and nobody would hear them. But you make a good point about being where the action is, the idea of serendipity. I happen to have met, a little name dropping here, John McCain, just before he ran for president against Obama. Just me and him sitting on a bus going down the mountainside, and we had a really great conversation. So you've given me a pause, and maybe I'll think about it in the future. But I'm glad you had a successful.
Yeah, and also just for PRs who work and support in leadership comms for CEOs and C-suites, those are the places you've got to go. You've got to figure out how to navigate those places and provide opportunities for your your client or your boss to have those sort of conversations and build that sort of relational capital, because CEOs are so busy. And so you've got to find a very efficient means for them to have multiple conversations, build trust in person in a short space of time. And that's where you start looking into COP and Davos and these key industry events. And UNGA is important, but not to be there for the sake of it, for visibility, but to be there with a strategic mindset and sort of targeted outcomes in mind.
Is New York the right place for the UN? There are renewed calls after the Trump stuff. Right, by very, very few saying get the UN out of New York.
Nairobi's having quite the play for UN. So you're beginning to hear whispers of certain agencies within the UN sort of, moving, more of their sort of senior staff in countries, like Kenya. I think Kenya's also building much more infrastructure in order for them to potentially host some sort of very large scale conference. So I wouldn't be surprised. And of course, the UN General Assembly started off, I believe, in London and then moved over to New York. And so it may, in the future, may end up somewhere else, and it may end up in the global south, or at least some elements, of the agencies and their respective sort of annual events. So may not be UNGA per se, but who knows? With the cuts of the budgets happening, you also have a lower salary count in terms of having more UN employees in the global south. So there's an economic imperative that's driving the UN to engage more with the global south, in addition to the ethical one.
So you heard it here first. UN moves to the global south. Bookmark this. Hey, I had a couple of ideas to suggest, and I don't know if we'll have time for them. So let me tell you quickly what I've been thinking about, and you guys can tell me which ones you're most interested in. So for me, toward the middle of the week, the Hegseth Trump Conference of Generals at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia, I thought was part performance, part meme worthy, and part shocking. So there's that. There was this suggestion that maybe the Energy Department of the U.S. had banned my word, actually Politico's words.
Politico's words. Yeah.
Doug and I had a nice exchange about whether that was an actual ban or just a hint. So that's one thing another thing to talk about. There is the government shutdown, which is huge, and at least in the immediate future. And then Sora, that the AI company, introduced a new version of their text to video platform, which is really quite remarkable. And you can kind of tackle that in a lighthearted way, but other people are raising more serious questions about it. So if you had to choose, which one should we start with? And then we can see where that goes.
I'd say the video to text. I mean, there's always this tsunami of AI tools that are just hitting us PR professionals, and it's just trying to figure out, which one do you go with?
Let's go with that.
It's worth our time to discuss.
Yeah. So let me set this up, and then I'm going to show you just sort of the fun video that's just a segment of it that Sora used to launch it. So again, you've seen versions of this. You probably get. I even sent you both a link from Facebook, which now Meta has its own text to video prompt. I just asked them to animate our logo, and it was kind of funny, kind of creepily accurate. It has Farzana kind of looking annoyed at me and Doug. And I found that funny, but it was completely manipulated image too, and you can imagine how that could be misused. So let's look at it from a lighthearted point of view. Let me just show you.
What is this? There's no wind. This is supposed to be epic. Turn it up. Turn it up. There's too much wind in my hair. Cut. Really on there. Sorry. Okay. Take two. Oh no. Kill the fan! Kill the fan! I can't do this anymore!
Keep rolling, keep rolling.
You want me to cut the fan? I'm done. I'm out. All right.
So that entire video was produced by
people
AI.
too. Yeah. The people as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Every part of it. And it's kind of funny, it's lighthearted. It feels like humans making mistakes, but it was machine showing humans making mistakes on a video. And I just think it illustrates its immense illustrative power. And you can imagine good things that could come from this, but you can imagine some not so good things. So I'll pause for a second,
Yeah.
and then I'll give you a different view on this. But I wonder if you have any kind of quick reactions. I know
Just
Farzana didn't know we were going to talk about it, so maybe you need a chance to absorb it.
The tsunami of AI generated results that's coming. And I work as a podcast agency, so we see it all the time. I'm always looking to create videos faster, simpler. AI, awesome. There's also AI agency, which is becoming all the rage, whereas booking things into your calendar with other people, that's going to be AI agency, like it or not. These AI tools, so I want to approach it from a couple of standpoints. There's a tsunami of content that's coming, and we're on the cusp of it. We're not there, but it's coming. Whereas we are going to be absolutely inundated with content. If you think you are already, you ain't seen nothing yet. More and more of it's going to come because it's going to be easier, cheaper to do. Siphoning through what's real, filtering through what's real and what's not real is going to be the job. So that's understanding perhaps the political ramifications. But one negative, let me tell you a quick story about the negative AI. There is a production company in the podcast world. I think they're based in Australia. I won't name them because I know they're very litigious, but they produce 3,000 podcast episodes per week, all with AI. The ideas are AI. The scripts are AI. The voices are AI. The personalities, Nigel Hawthorne, AI, all of it. Costs them $1 per episode to crank these things out. They sell advertising within it. They did an episode. This is one example of how horribly inaccurate AI can be. They did an episode on the history of Sydney, Australia. Things are going along fine until about the 10-minute mark when suddenly the host inexplicably starts talking about Sydney Sweeney. That's how bad some of this is. And that'll cause a danger, not to the big companies or the big podcasts because they have their audiences, but the smaller independent podcasts. We're in a world where we're trying to create more voice, more democratic approach. Anybody can own their own channel, but the smaller independent podcasts fight for audience, and to have to fight an AI army is death.
Yeah.
Because eventually the AI army is going to knock it out, and the listener is left with mis and disinformation as a result.
Well, I want to read something from Catherine Arrow. She's a practitioner and an educator based in New Zealand. And I had mentioned that I might bring this up on the show. And she said she'd love to maybe offer a comment, but it's 4 a.m. in New Zealand. So I didn't ask her to do that. But she did write a post about it. And by the way, I'll include a link to this, to your post on Unga. Farzana, I do a little weekly summary, and so people that want to go a little deeper, they can look in the links. And I decided not to put this on screen because I know many people access this after we recorded it and are listening and can't see what I put on the screen. So I thought I would just read what she said, and this is what stood out for me. For decades, I have been an advocate for technology, for the marvelous things it can do, for the ways it can improve lives and create opportunities. I've celebrated and amplified its promise because I believed and still believe such tools can serve humanity. But what confronts us now, and she was talking specifically about this Sora 2 technology, is technology that reshapes our human world beyond recognition. And it's wielded by not disinterested stewards, but humans driven by profit, not progress. And she raises some pretty profound questions about, how are we going to manage this technology? What does it mean about our ability to discern between objective reality and maybe artificial or manufactured reality? And I just thought that was an interesting question. And it's kind of easy to get caught up in either the promise of being able to make cheap video fast or the short-term economic threats that you laid out, Doug. And then the bigger stepping back, what does this really mean for our experience as humans? And I just had one thought on it, but I know you guys have been thinking about AI a lot too. So what's your take on Catherine's view? Or your own?
Gosh, I mean, I would say, I think I'm thinking as a mother, I'm thinking as a daughter, I'm thinking about media literacy. I'm thinking about perhaps, people of my parents' generation, my sort of in-laws, my mother-in-law. I'm thinking about how would she discern what is AI generated, what isn't. Even now, sometimes it can be slightly glitchy, but it's just getting better and better that, people like us who work with AI have much more of a critical gaze on it than perhaps those who aren't so familiar with what is AI generated versus the nuances of non-AI generators. So I worry about these scam artists out there, how they'll scam the most vulnerable members of our society. And I also worry about that us as PRs, should we be thinking about how can we help the educational sector in ensuring that media literacy is embedded, and not just for children, because actually they will grow up, in this sort of more AI aware, digitally native aware, but also for our elderly in our society as well, who are often alone and do not have that sort of interaction with people that lets them understand how fast and rapid the ascent of AI technology is in terms of how real it is. And perhaps you can imagine like an elderly woman, sitting at home at Christmas and thinking she's getting a call from her son asking for money for Christmas, and it's just not there. So there's real human repercussions. And I think as PRs, it gives us an opportunity to really take our skills of communicating and understanding the need for media literacy beyond our industry. And I think there is an opportunity for us actually to engage with the education sector, and the government, I think, also need to be aware of this growing impact, because it's, AI is full of opportunity, but it's also full of threat.
I don't like regulation as a rule, but wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of code on material saying this percentage of this video, this script, this audio was generated using AI?
Yeah, but it's difficult to police because, back in the day with influencers, remember, there was this whole, regulation around them that if you're selling a product or you have a commercial relationship with a brand, you have to make it sort of known in your Instagram post. And then, of course, a lot of them would either just ignore it, or they would circumvent it by having like 50 odd hashtags with one tiny hashtag in the middle, which is #ad. And so it's difficult to not only bring in the regulation, but it's also difficult to police. And the issue is that those people who are often creating the legislation may not actually be as clued up about the technology. And so often you then see a time lag of perhaps the legislation that eventually does come in would have been useful 10 years ago. So
I can't wait for the first AI police or the first AI politician.
Well, yeah.
I'm sure there's one in development. Well, we could probably go on this. I had one thing I just wanted to plug, but Doug, you've been teasing this ostrich story now, and Farzana and I are desperate to hear it. But I just wanted, there's a guy that I respect a lot here in the UK named Chris Pratt. He works in an agency called Burson, big agency, but he's also done a lot of volunteer work on the what he calls the crisis in climate and information. And he made me aware of what he's calling what his group is calling the Climate Replay Book. And it equips communicators, campaigners, journalists, and researchers with fresh tools for navigating the complexity and strengthening climate discourse in an age of cultural divides. I just think it's an interesting thing that there are people thinking about all of these issues in thoughtful ways. And I'd hope to give that a little bit more attention. Maybe we can in the future. Your podcast, you and Farzana's podcast this week on Hispanic communications in the U.S. I thought tipped into a much bigger question we could have about international communications. This is obviously within the U.S. market, but it made me a little homesick for my my bilingual South Texas upbringing, and it sounded familiar. So that's something else maybe we could spend some more time on in the future. But you got to tell us what's going on with the ostriches, because I still don't get it.
Okay, well, if you haven't heard this story, you've had your head in the sand. Back in December of last year, roll the video. British Columbia, which is in Western Canada, ostrich farm had a rough patch when dozens of birds died of avian flu, bird flu. By January of this year, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency said the remaining flock, about 400 tall, feathered sprinters, dinosaurs, had to go. The farmers pushed back, pointing out the obvious. The birds still standing were perfectly healthy, strutting around like nothing ever happened. Soon the story went from local farm drama to international oddity. Animal lovers, believe it or not, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Oz auditioned as ostrich bodyguards. Since then, the ostriches have stayed alive and well, waiting while lawyers flap their wings in court. And today's the big moment. The Supreme Court of Canada is taking in final submissions and will decide if these birds get to keep running laps in their pen, or if the Food Inspection Agency finally makes them run out of time. Farzana and David, I want to put you in a quick spot. You're the PR leaders for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. These ostriches now are perfectly healthy, but the owners defied an order saying to cull the herd. What's your narrative and what are your messages?
Well, I always defer to Farzana on these things.
I would sort of, if I was them, I'd be scrambling around this thing. Is there like a review process? Is there an appeal process? I sort of slightly backtrack out of the awful position of being seen to cull these gorgeous animals that the country's just got behind, and it's gosh, it's a difficult one. Do they have an appeal process?
This is it. Supreme Court is our highest court in the land.
The highest it could get.
Yeah.
Oh God,
I'd say let the ostriches live. Free the ostriches. That's
but you work for the CFIA. You got to develop the messaging. This is like, just in case the Supreme Court says cull the herd. What would your messaging be?
Well, you could always go rogue and get one of your social media managers to then do this little, protest on X saying "Save the ostriches," and then
that's probably what I would do.
When your company's moving right, when your company's going right, you want it to go left, eh?
If I couldn't bury it in bureaucracy, which is what Farzana was suggesting, just let it string out, then I'd probably suggest a leaked rogue campaign.
I hope that, the sensible thing is to fine the owners some monetary fine and let the birds live. That seems to be the cogent approach, but who knows what the Supreme Court's going to decide.
Yeah, but it's a great PR opportunity for some benevolent sort of, philanthropist to come and say, well, I've got this huge, multi-acre farm and the ostriches can live their happy life. And, and then they live in luxury.
And Oz were doing. That's exactly what Dr. Oz was saying.
Yeah. Those ostriches will be living at large better than us.
Well, you want to take any words of the day to take us out with, Doug? Or do you want one of us to do that?
Can I do one actually?
Yeah.
So we had a sober moment in the UK. We had an awful terrorist incident that happened at a synagogue in Manchester, which is a city here in the UK. Yeah. And the Jewish community, the British Jewish community, is a very small community. I think it's perhaps not 0.5%. And I've got many Jewish friends who have told me for a number of sort of months, alongside Muslim friends, about the rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And it was incredibly sad to hear what happened. And so my thoughts, or our thoughts, are with our Jewish colleagues, their families, their communities. And also, I would say when something horrific like this happens, it's really lovely to be able to reach out to your Jewish friends and colleagues and just to check in with them. Because actually, when you're a minority and something horrific like this happens, this is the time to show your support, to reach out. And it's particularly touching when somebody from outside of your community does it. And that is a wonderful gesture of kindness and empathy. As PRs, it is our ability to empathize. So that's
amen.
A note I'd leave you with.
Amen.
Thanks, Farzana. Good one. Good one. All right. Have a great weekend, guys.
Okay.
All right. Should I take us out here? That's all the time we have. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Special thanks, as always, to producers Emily Page, David Olajide. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Curzon Public Relations, Stories and Strategies, and Folgate Advisors. If you'd like to join the Advisory Club Mega Chat, please get in touch with David on LinkedIn. See you next week. Have a great weekend.